Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Keep Up with Pryme, where we will see some of our new features and we'll also take a deep dive into contracts. My name is Laura Andradas. I'm marketing lead at Pryme Global, and together with Aske Ols, product manager at Pryme Global, we welcome you to today's webinar. This time we're going to skip the advanced project's new features, since last time we didn't have time to cover the deep dive into contracts. And this time we want to make sure we do have time for this. So we'll go straight to the Pryme app's new features. And starting with Pryme Matters, there's the new invoice creation for contracts page, which similarly to the invoice creation for matters, it displays invoicing data for all contracts and combines details for all matters on the contract. Apart from this, invoice instructions, invoice status, and invoice responsible are now also available for contracts and apply to contracts. Our Pryme Time application, in here we have added a graphical indicator, in this case stripes, to unfinished tracked time slots on the time tracking calendar. And apart from this, you can also update a budget with work assignments. Moving forward to the Pryme Fund Management, when posting allocations in batch, you can also generate a list of errors to identify what went wrong with the ones that weren't posted. And there's also the commitment expiry date, which has been added when looking up for commitments so that you can prioritize which ones are getting close to expiration. And last but not least, the Pryme CIS and RCT tax retention application. In this case, when a tax treatment status has been set on the vendor, the retention tax business posting group will be pre-populated. And that was it from my side. Now I would like to hand it over to Aske. So thank you, Aske.
Thank you. And so we will start with Pryme Matters, which is our vertical solution, which is mostly focused on the business of legal firms, accounting firms, but there's actually no limitation in in the functionality that says you could not use it for other customers as well. So we are adding a lot of features and functionalities that are mostly targeting law firms and accounting firms, but again, it could be used for other companies as well. So the first thing I want to show you is the invoice creation for contracts. Now, invoice creation is a concept we have in Pryme Matters, which is similar to invoice suggestions. It works slightly different, again, due to the specific requirements of companies like accounting firms, legal firms, and they often use contracts to combine the work on multiple projects into one contract. In the deep dive later, we will look into how contracts can be used. But in this example, I'll just show you what it could look like for a given contract. So what we've added is that for a contract, you can, of course, have your standard suggested invoice created directly, but you can also use invoice creation. And so what you get is something, again, similar to invoice suggestion, but here we show it for the entirety of one contract. Looking at the suggested lines, we will see that there's now a project number column. And in this contract, we have entries for both project number 1 and down here we have for demo 2 as well. So we are combining multiple entries from multiple projects into one invoice, and we're making it possible to review these and make changes. We also show some totals, the number of hours per resource, for the entirety of the contract to be invoiced at that point in time. And of course, we can make changes irregular and we can create an invoice from here. It's also possible to set the invoicing responsible and invoicing status just as we would on a single invoice. Again, if you're using the Pryme Matters functionality where we have this more workflow of invoicing, being able to decide who's responsible, what is the current status, and as a responsible, you will get some cues in here to show you if you have something you're responsible for that you should process. Next up, we have Pryme Time, where we added a bit of functionality. First off, a minor change, you could think, but it's something that has been requested. When I look up one of my timesheets, and let's see, I'm working on finishing my timesheet for the previous week. So opening this up, I'll open up my time tracking to see if I've finished tracking all my time. So looking at my time tracking entries, these are entries. Now this is a long list. So I want to visualize this with a calendar. And opening this calendar, I'll see that I have my entire week. Everything looks okay. Maybe there's something to finish up, but I started some work on Sunday here, and it showed as these striped boxes, and that's because I never pushed the stop button on this one. So it shows as going to the end of the day, but in reality, I never stopped it. And probably I should put in a stop time here, and I could do that by simply dragging it to the time when I did stop working on that. Or I could also double click on it and say I stopped at a certain time, I stopped this at 11. And so that is then done, it stopped. And now it shows up as normal. But just to indicate those special cases where you forgot to stop the timer, because that does happen. The second feature is not related to the timesheet per se, but we include it in its Pryme Time because it is related to the planning of people's time. And so what we can do is on the resource board, if I have a project where I'm basing my budgeting more on what I plan rather than starting out with a budget and saying, this is my budget, and then I'll create planning from there. So a reverse planning scenario, which is quite common in some areas of professional services where we say we don't know what the budget really is. But as we plan it out, we want to make sure that we keep our budget up to date with what we planned. Then I could go into my resource board or my resource planner or my individual project planner, take my project. Let's say I have a project here to plan that I'm saying we put some time on it. I have some additional hours here, 4 hours of work. I put that in and I'm starting to plan out the work for the project. But I want to make sure that I have a budget which is in sync with my planning. Then I can use this new update budget with work assignments function, where I decide what budget to update. And that can either be a predefined budget version, like the active budget version or the anchor budget, the ETC, EAC quote. I can even give a specific budget version if I know that it is this one budget version. I do want to update the initial estimate, and that's not on the list. And then I say, okay, of course I can add some filters if I only want to do a partial update. And I can also specify if I want to replace the existing budget, which is most often the case. Because if we run this process multiple times, we don't want to just add on to it. We want to also take away what has been changed. And so with this, I now get a project budget. It should be for 4 hours and 8 hours respectively on this project. Opening up the project, I should see that I have a number of hours on that project for this. And yes, I have my 4 hours, 8 hours and 4 hours respectively, which happens to coincide with the 8 hours and 4 hours that I put on as my work assignments. Next up, we have fund management. In the fund management area, when you start to accumulate a lot of projects that you've been funding, you want to go to a model where you batch process those. You want to update them with new usage, update your reservations, etc. And so instead of going project by project, going in and posting, you probably want to say, just select all of them and post reservations or post usage for everything in one go. The problem in the past has been if there was a problem with one of those projects, the whole process would fail and you would have to go in and find it. Now we're enabling a error collection method where you can go in. I'll post my reservations. I on purpose put in that I want to reserve $1 million for this project and I don't have $1 million in funds here, so this will fail. But posting the reservations, I now get an error message saying this specific demo 01 has a problem on it. And I can open this one up so we can look at what the problems are. And clearly here, I'm trying to reserve $1 million and I don't have that money. So that's not possible. I'll have to fix that. But the important part is I only get errors for the projects where there are some issues and the rest just go through without any errors. The second part is on the planning of, or the allocation of a project. If I'm going in to specify what commitments I want to use. In the previous release, we added the capability to specify an expiry date on commitments, so money that must be used before a certain date. Now we highlighted that and show that in different areas where, so you can easily see if this is money that have expired and we cannot use them anymore. Last up is in our CIS functionality in the CIS and RCT app. We've added additional functionality for the verification of vendors, where when you have a vendor and you're verifying that with the tax authority, the HMRC, you can have that verification also create the correct setup data for that vendor. So in this case, I have John Smith. I could do the verification from the list, but I'll do it from the card in this case. And we can see here that we haven't set up a posting group for John Smith, and that's because he's not yet verified. So we don't really know what rate he's registered with the HMRC. So we don't know which posting group to put in. And if I go in and I say verify subcontractor, it will send off that request to the HMRC. That will come back with a tax treatment status, either being the standard rate, the higher rate, or gross rate, meaning no deduction. And we can define and set up what these different statuses mean, what retention tax business posting group we should apply depending on the status we get. In this case, we got back that he is at a standard rate. And that means we also set standard rate as a business posting group. Now, this might not be a huge time saving if you're doing one subcontract at a time, but if you have a long list of subcontractors, then it definitely helps that you automatically get that posting set up by default. And that should cover off the new features we have in Pryme Matters, Pryme Time, Fund Management, and the CIS app. The last 12, 13 minutes I'll spend on showing you a little bit of contract functionality. I think there's a lot of people who know about that we have contract functionality, but we also see that not that many are using the full functionality set that comes with contracts. The concept of a contract you could look at it in two different ways. One is it's just a way to group projects. So I have a contract here, and within that, I have on my contract plan different contract tasks. Each of the contract tasks can then include multiple projects. So this can be a way to set up a structure where you have multiple projects grouped together and you get an overview over what is the total commitment we have with this client. And it's more of an easy way to do invoicing to get that high level overview without going into reporting. But the real power comes in treating the contract as something that represents a commercial agreement you have with that client or customer. And that's where some of these statistics like the contract amount and change orders come into place. And we don't see much of that when you just open the contract plan. You actually have to go into the contract card in here. And there you can start doing some additional setup. Parts of this is the same as you would see on the project card, and I'll skip over that. But we first of all have a number of dates which are contract dates. So what is the original start date? What is the original end date? And then when we revise it, what is the new end date? Again, because this is more of a commercial contract, the customer expected us to finish by a certain date, but then changes were made, change orders, etc., that extended that end date. And we have an anticipated start, an authorized to start, an actual start. And when we anticipated to complete and when we actually complete all these specific dates, we want to have a look at when we have these big contracts with multiple sub-projects on them. We have this section on contract amounts. How do we calculate what is a contract amount? Here I based it on the project budget, meaning I will summarize the project budgets for all the projects within the contract and roll that up into a total contract value. But I could also base it on an authorized contract amount where we at an early stage say this is what we're authorized to use for this contract, and then we build up the projects afterwards. I could also base it on the project tasks instead, where for each of those set a contract amount, and then that adds up. That goes a bit together with the approval process, because we can set up approvals, and the approvals here are for change orders. A big part of what you can use contracts for is tracking change orders and getting a document to be printed or to send to the customer when changes are to be made. Now, I haven't set up an approval process here, but it's very similar to the budget approval or the time approval in that you can have up to 3 levels of approvals. You can send out emails when there's something to reapprove. You can get emails sent out to the project manager if approvals are not given, etc. So let's have a look at the change order functionality, which we can set up the approvals for and which can add to the contract amount. The way we can do that is with the functionality for contract change orders. And we can create a new contract, a change order in here and say we want it for this contract, we want it for a specific contract task, and we want it to apply to a certain project within that project contract task. And with that, I get my change order. Now I can start to describe what is the work of that change. So in this case, it might be additional tests. That's what the customer wants us to do. We can put categories on. We can put on a date for the change order. We can say, what is the schedule impact for this request? So we say there's an additional 3 days. This will add to the contract. We can describe the scope or nature of the change in more detail with a long description of what the work is we are going to do. And we can add information about who requested it, why did they request it, what is their change order number, what's their reference, etc. If we're using the progress billing, we can add additional information related to that. We can also have, again, this approval process. Who should approve this change order? Again, up to 3 steps. And this could come from the contract if defined there. And then the question again of how do we calculate what the value of this change order is? I could put this and say, well, this is something we specify. We allow for 10,000 extra for this change order, and then we want them to approve this. So we can print this out as a document. And this is something we could send over to the client, say, this is the change order you requested. Let's have a look at the details. What is the number? What is the details? What is the original amount of the contract? How much is the change order amount? What will be the total amount? And there are fields for them to sign and for us to sign as well. So we get a document flow on top of this for the change orders. And this is something you get with using contracts. There's actually no reason why you cannot do a contract for a single project. It does not have to be a combination of many projects in order to use a contract. You can do a contract and say that contract is for a single project. So a common misconception, contracts are valuable if you have multiple projects. Yes, contracts are valuable if you have multiple contracts, but contracts can also be valuable if you only have a single project, because you add that extra commercial or agreement level layer on top of the project. And that's part of the idea here, that the project should be mostly for the project accounting part, for the project management part, but we separate the whole commercial part or the extra details for the commercial part out onto the contract. There's of course a lot of functionality related to the contract as well. We looked at invoicing, and you have some of the same billing principles here that you could use for an individual project. So you can do progress billing, but in case you do progress billing for a contract, then of course the progress billing is across all the projects you have on that contract. We can also, if we invoice directly, time and material invoicing, we can create a specific invoice setup for the contract, which has its own structure, and where we will highlight each of the projects and how much is included for each of them separately on the invoice. So if I go ahead and say create invoice, now I could use the invoice creation functionality I showed just earlier, but as it is only available with Matters, I'll just use the create invoice functionality. Then we'll see that we get an invoice which is not only grouped by whatever grouping I defined, that being resources or tasks or whatever, but it's also grouped by project. So we get a very clear specification of the work performed. In this case, I have for project 1, I have resources, and for project 2, I have resources as well, and they're separated out, so it becomes a very clear invoice in the end to the customer. So a lot of functionality within the contracts, could even be statistics for the entirety of the contract. There are multiple reports available on the contract level, etc. And you can do many of the same things you could do on projects, that you can have templates for your contracts, task templates, because there is a setup here where you can have groups and subgroups, etc. So a lot of functionality. You can even do attachments, you can add comments, and you can look at the different budget versions, the totals, etc. So have a look at contracts. There's a lot of good features and functionality within the contract area, and don't consider it only as something that is valuable if you want to aggregate work from multiple projects into one. It is a layer on top for that commercial side, for that extra control side, extra billing and reporting side that you get by adding projects to a contract. And with this, I will end my demo, and I think we'll open up for a little bit of QA.
So thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you in a month, more or less. Have a fantastic week, and hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.